Welcome back to the Ant on the Move podcast. How is January for you guys? Thankfully, we're finally getting some cooler weather. This, the third week now of January? Finally getting a little bit of cooler weather. Very excited about that. Hopefully it sticks around for just a few days, not too long. All right, well, in today's podcast, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to talk about a few books that if you're interested in space or the state of Florida, these are books that I would recommend reading because I've read them and I think they help you understand Florida better, learn more about Florida, or are really good books for learning about space. So we're going to begin with that, and then I have an interesting spot here in Florida that I have not visited, but that I have read about, and if you can visit there, will be awesome. But let's begin with these books. I forget how many I have, but we'll start from the beginning and go from there. So the first book I recommend is a book called On This Day in Florida History. It's by Nick Wynne. Now, personally, I don't own this book, but I've been able to download it or borrow it through a download library service. And I haven't read through the entire thing. It's a very big book, but it has some cool historical information, some cool facts about Florida that I was not aware of. Some things that I did know already. Some very simple facts like, hey, when did Ponce de Leon come in and first step foot on land here in Florida? For many of us native Floridians, we know that fact. Others don't, so it's a good fact to be in there. But so that's a very, very good book. If you were looking for a book a day, almost like a daily read, this would be a good book just to read for each day. Just pick it up, find out something about Florida history each day. So I do highly recommend that one. The next one is one I just finished a few days ago. It's called Florida Oranges by Erin, and I believe this is Thursbry. Thursby. And as the name might indicate, it is about the history of how oranges made their way initially to Florida, how I believe it's the Spanish brought them here, and how years of hard freezes, especially in the late 1890s. There, I got it. There was some in the 1880s, but it was more in the end of the 1890s that the hard freezes started to change the Florida orange industry. We still are one of the major producers, but in a not as much as we were originally. It also talks about who some of the famous orange growers were, like Dr. Phillips. If you know the Dr. Phillips Center in Orlando, this is who it's named after, a guy who spent a lot of money and time on orange groves. You learn about Tropicana, you learn about how concentrate orange juice is made, when they started making concentrate, when they started making more orange juice, what kind of the purpose was behind that. So, and also now why the push is that you should drink orange juice, the whole vitamin C thing. It was a publicity push to sell more orange juice, but hey, it's good stuff. Reading through it, it made me want to go drink some orange juice, more eat an orange. I wanted to go eat like a good orange, like a navel orange or a some sort of orange. I didn't care what, I just wanted an orange. But it's a very, very good book on oranges in Florida and the history of that. Now, onto space. An interesting book is called Fighting for Space by Amy Shira. I don't know how to say her last name. Teitel? T-E-I? T... Oh, I scribbled this. I believe it's T-E-L. But if you look for the book Fighting for Space, it's about two women who were instrumental in trying to push for women astronauts. And so it's kind of the look at that. They referred to them, they didn't refer to themselves. A news agency referred to them as the Mercury women. They coined some sort of phrase for them. And while their efforts did not allow any of these women, I forget how many there were now. Oh, I didn't write that fact down. Over 20 for sure, over 20 women who attempted the same or similar types of tests to the male astronauts, and how many of them were able to pass the same psychological, physical test that people like Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, John Glenn, they were able to pass. So proving that physical ability was not an issue for women in space, according to what the test proved. So it's a very interesting book. I would say that the beginning of it is very good. It's following one woman, Jackie Cochran, and that part is very, very interesting. The second half I struggled with a little bit more, only because we started bringing in more people, and occasionally I would kind of lose the focus of who exactly I was reading about. This a little bit, because there were a lot of people happening towards the end of the book. But it was a very interesting read, kind of interesting to see it from another perspective. That time frame of the first manned missions into space, seeing a different perspective on that was interesting. Another book I finished just at the end of the year is a book called How to Astronaut by Terry Virts. Virts. Now, Terry Virts was selected as a shuttle pilot by NASA in 2000, and Virts worked in many lesser-known astronaut roles before getting his first chance to fly Shuttle Endeavour in 2010. 4 years later, he returned to space via a Soyuz rocket and spent time on the ISS, including time as commander of the ISS. In this book, instead of being a long discourse, each chapter is relatively short, but it answers many common questions about how to become an astronaut, what do astronauts deal with, what are some interesting experiences he had working with Russian astronauts, cosmonauts. So it answers a lot of questions. It would be a very good book, minus one chapter. If you see it, you'll understand which one it was. But one chapter for kids, it would be a very good book for someone who's interested in learning about space, what astronauts' lives are like. Many books, including ones about like Apollo 11. I've read some very thick books about Apollo 11, some different missions, and for kids, it'd be hard to read about, and they're not focused on... They're focused on the mission as a whole, and not on, like, hey, what does an astronaut do? If you're reading this, it talks about lesser roles that he worked in. Virts became an astronaut in the year 2000. Yet it wasn't until 2010 that he became an astronaut officially, flew into space. Before that, he's working all kinds of various roles. Now I've forgotten which ones they were, but I believe he worked in communications. He worked as a liaison in 2003 when Columbia was flying back. He was with the family at the Kennedy Space Center when he's looking at his watch, realizing Columbia should be here and she's not. And he had to deal with the family, ushering family around, moving family, helping to explain to families what had happened on February 1st, 2003. So, thinking about that, realizing the disaster that happened to Columbia, he still continued on and became, went into space, flew on Endeavour. So, lots of things he's had to deal with, but he explains them very clearly, very well, and I do highly recommend this book. Another book I recommend is called Live from Cape Canaveral, and this is by J. Barbee. And I didn't write this down correctly, so I don't remember if this is just the author's name or if this is actually the name, also a name of the man the story is about. I am drawing a blank on that now. You'll have to check it out and let me know. But it goes kind of behind the scenes. We talk about going behind the scenes as an astronaut. Okay, what do they really deal with? This is going behind the camera for a news agency and getting to hear what a news anchor, a news reporter had to deal with, who he talked to get information about launches, things that were transpiring, disasters, so forth. So this is also a very interesting read to give you, again, another perspective. So, books on perspective, fighting for space, women's perspective, wanting to be astronauts, thinking they could be astronauts, how to astronaut, stories from an actual astronaut, and then Live from Cape Canaveral, learning about the media behind who's showing us what we get to see. So these are all very interesting books. My final recommendation would be for anyone who is interested, 1, in Florida history, 2, in Florida tourism, and 3, in that place called, we'll see if you can fill in the blank. You probably know, Disney World. So this is a book about Disney World. It's called Buying Disney's World by Erin Goldberg. Now, if you've ever wondered how and why Walt Disney chose Florida for his new park, what were his other options? I'm not going to spoil it for you. But what were his other options? What other places did he consider? I really want to give some spoilers, but I won't tell you. But you really have to read the book. It's very, very interesting. I always just thought, oh, it makes sense. There's one on the West Coast, there's one on the East Coast. And that did kind of play into the factor that, one fact is Disney was looking for a place that had a good climate, so it could be open year-round. That is a fact. But it's very interesting how he came to the decision to choose Florida, and even more specifically, why he chose where he chose. Interesting fact is which day he chose it. So read the book, find out which day he chose the area that was purchased for Disney World. And there's just lots of interesting facts behind that. So make sure you check that out. So those are my book recommendations. Now it's time to turn our attention to the main topic of today's podcast. Before I begin talking about a cool location here in Florida to check out, may I remind you that I have a YouTube channel as well. You can find both this podcast posted there on Wednesday about roughly the same time as it's here on podcasts on Spotify and Anchor, and I forget where else we're at the moment, but you can see the podcast there. Occasionally there'll be some pictures included in that. Other times there'll just be a static screen. It just depends on the topic, perhaps, and how creative I feel that day. But occasionally there will be some pictures that go along with it. Like this podcast, I believe, will have pictures. But I like all things history, and so on YouTube you will find a lot of things about SeaWorld, because I enjoy that also. But I have some cool videos about things like Fort Clinch, Fort de Soto, the Castillo de San Marcos there in St. Augustine, and obviously a lot of forts that I've done, but I do have some videos about a few other historic places, drawing a blank as to what they are now, but I do have some other videos like that, so check those out. And speaking of historic places, I have a question. Have you ever wondered what is the oldest building in the United States? Perhaps not the United States, let's just go with Florida. We're going to answer that question. Now, we're talking today about the Ancient Spanish Monastery, which is located at 16711 West Dixie Highway in North Miami Beach. Now, the Ancient Spanish Monastery is a real-life, medieval Spanish monastery cloister. Now, perhaps you caught two very important words, the word medieval and the word Spanish. Before being assembled in Miami, the Spanish monastery's first home was in Sacramento, Spain. My apologies if I pronounced that wrong. So, how did a Spanish monastery make its way across the Atlantic to Florida? Well, the monastery was constructed between 1133 and 1141. It was originally named the Monastery of Our Lady, Queen of the Angels, before being renamed for someone who had died in the area, Saint Bernard de Clera. Again, my Spanish pronunciation's off. If you know how to say that, please let me know. Now, the structure was used as a monastery for almost 700 years before it was seized and sold to be used as both a granary and a stable during a time of unrest in the 1830s. The monastery was founded by Alfonso the Seventh of Castile and Leon. It was built in the traditional style of Sistine Roman architecture in Spain. In 1926, because it's been used for a granary and a stable for many years. In 1926, William Randolph Hearst is stated to have illegally purchased the monastery's cloister and outbuildings. The church building itself remains in Spain as a privately owned property, and it was declared a national monument on June 3rd, 1931. So what William Randolph Hearst bought was the cloisters. And so, in some outbuildings, but we're going to focus on just the cloister part. So the cloisters were disassembled for transport. Each piece was numbered, packed in wooden crates lined with hay. Now, while I don't know the size of the crates, like how big these things were, it is reported that the building was transported in 11,000 crates. The crates made it across, well, first they had to get from wherever they were in Sacramento. They had to go to the coast. They had to be put on a ship. I mean, an entire building came across the Atlantic Ocean in a ship, or maybe it was multiple ships. I don't know. How big of a ship would you need in the 1920s to carry an entire cloister? Anyhow, the crates, they arrived safely in Florida, they arrived safely in the U.S., but at the time there was this outbreak of something called hoof and mouth disease in Spain. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture was concerned about the hay that was surrounding the blocks for protection. So as a preventative measure, workers spent 3 months opening each and every one of the 11,000 crates, removing and burning the hay before repacking the stones in their crates. Now, each of the crates had also been numbered for identification, but the stones were not repacked properly, and some of the stones were lost. Soon after the stones arrived in the U.S., Hearst faced financial problems and was not able to proceed with his plans, which were to rebuild the monastery at San Simeon in California, which is also where the Hearst Castle is located. So San Simeon is along Route 1, about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, for those who don't know. And that's where Hearst Hilltop pretty
Mansion
cool. Got a castle,
was located.
and then your cloisters back behind. Would have been pretty cool. But the bits of the pieces of the cloisters remained nearly forgotten in a Brooklyn warehouse until two Miami businessmen, William Edgman and Raymond Moss, purchased them in 1952. Edgemont and Moss bought the Spanish cloister with the intent to create a tourist attraction. The masonry was hauled south to a small plant nursery in northern Miami, where, in the words of Time magazine, the biggest jigsaw puzzle in history began to be reassembled in 1953. It would take 19 months and nearly $1.5 million, or $20 million in today's currency, to complete the project. In 1964, the Ancient Spanish Monastery, as it had been named by Edgman and Moss, was sold to multimillionaire Colonel Robert Portland Jr. He proceeded to give the monastery to the Bishop of Florida, and today the monastery is owned by the Episcopal Diocese of South Florida. Now, today, the monastery serves as both a look back at history, as well as a tourist attraction, and event venue. You can have a wedding there, you can have a conference there, they do all kinds of things. They have special concerts, musical performances, so forth. There's also a museum on the property with some historic Spanish artifacts, like a harmonium, if you've never heard one of those, would be pretty cool, and pieces of armor that were actually worn during the Crusades, which is awesome. So this would be the perfect attraction to add to your Florida bucket list of historic places. Now, at the time of this recording, the cost is $10 for adults and $5 for students and seniors. And something to keep in mind is that they are closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, and just because of different events, they can also be closed unexpectedly for, weddings, so forth. So it might be wise to give them a call before you go, just to make sure that they are open for tourists that day. But it sounds beautiful. I guess there's gardens around, so it sounds like very, very beautiful. If I get down there, I'll definitely make a video about it. But until then, there's someone on YouTube, I'll find the name and link her video. Super Enthused, I believe is the name. And she used to live in Miami for a while, and she made a video about it, which is how I learned about it. So I'll link that so you can check out her video and see some images of what the cloisters look like, because it was pretty impressive. Great if you wanted to do like wedding photos, engagement photos, graduation photos, whatever. It'd be a fun spot to go. But real quick, this isn't technically Florida, but this is along the same idea of things that were in Spain. Oh, real quick, before I get there, changing topics. So I did answer the question, how was the oldest building? I could be wrong, but technically, if we're saying something that, the oldest, structure, even though it was built in Spain originally and brought here, it could be as old as 1133. So the cloisters were built originally in 1133. They weren't officially rebuilt here until the 1950s, but it's still the oldest structure in my opinion. Oldest structure. Castillo de San Marcos, it gets to be second now. If we're talking original structure built in Florida, I believe the Castillo wins. Might be another spot also that wins. But otherwise, it's the cloisters, just by age. Enough of that. So another thing that was originally built somewhere else and purchased and transported to the U.S. Who knew they did this stuff? But it is the London Bridge. Now, for context, it is not the Tower of London Bridge. That's not the one. It is just the London Bridge. So there have been several bridges that span the Thames River. And one of the last ones, I'm trying to find this spot here. Trying to figure out. Okay, so the one we're talking about is referred to as the New London Bridge, and it was completed in 1831. On the video, if you watch the podcast video, you'll see some pictures. But due to the weight of the automobile traffic, this bridge built in 1831, it wasn't going to last. It wasn't suitable for the 20th century, and it began to sink into the River Thames at the rate of about an inch every 8 years, which isn't too bad, but the problem was that by 1924, the east side of the bridge was like 3 to 4 inches lower than on the west side. And that's a problem. There's some structural integrity there. So in 1967, the Common Council of the City of London began to look for potential buyers for the London Bridge. And the Lake Havasul city founder, he was a chainsaw magnate, Robert P. McCulloch Sr. He saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have something really cool in his town. So he placed the winning bid of $2.4 million on April 18th, 1968, which is over $17 million today. And he purchased the bridge. If you check out, I'll add a link to the golakehavasul.com website. It gives you more numbers, details. But let me find out how they brought it across here. It also included the ornate lampposts that are on the bridge today. And these were lampposts that were made from melted down cannons captured by the British from Napoleon's army after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. I think these are on the bridge in Arizona. So Lake Havasul, Arizona is where they are located. Now, the blocks were disassembled, and again, they were numbered, just like with the cloisters, and there were 10,276 exterior granite blocks from the original bridge that were shipped. They were shipped overseas through the Panama Canal to California and then trucked from Long Beach out to Arizona. They had to dredge a canal. Everything cost like $7 million to put it together. It's just crazy. You'll have to read more about it. But it's just another interesting fact of like, hey, here's something else that originally was in another country over in Europe, and now it's here in the United States. So just thought that was an interesting tidbit. So definitely check out the London Bridge in Lake Havasul, Arizona. Some interesting facts there. All right, well, that is all I have for today. Thank you for listening to the Ant on the Move podcast. If you have any recommendations of places I should highlight in an episode or something you think I should talk about, let me know on Instagram. You can send me a message there, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below. And if it's a really good idea that I haven't thought of, we might turn it into a podcast, or I could make it as a video. Who knows? But thanks for listening. Tune in next week when we talk about, as long as I don't change my mind, space tragedies. Talk to you next week.